My name is Manaya Brisbane, and today I will be talking about the history of lynchings in the United States. Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the roots. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. On April 20th, 1939, Billie Holiday, a famous jazz singer at the time, took the stage of West Fourth's Cafe Society in New York City and shocked the audience with a horrific depiction and unavoidable reality of African Americans. There was no escaping the image of a mutilated Black body dangling from a tree branch, and according to the Equal Justice Initiative, there have been 4,080 documented lynchings between 1877 and 1950. That's the equivalent of the average community college. This only accounts for lynchings that took place during the Reconstruction era up through the Civil Rights and Jim Crow. This doesn't account for anything that took place prior to. Today, I will be discussing the history of lynchings in the United States. We will go over its purpose, its origins, and its impact. First, let's talk about the origins. As stated before, the Equal Justice Initiative has documented 4,080 lynchings between 1877 and 1950. It's also noted that lynchings peaked between 1880 and 1940, so there's a small window of time where it was very intense. Some key events that happened during these years were the Great Migration and the Harlem Renaissance. It should also be noted that during the start of the timeline, 1877 is the end of Reconstruction. Within the number of documented lynchings, the Equal Justice Initiative has documented areas in the US that were most active during that timeline. According to this, there were 12 states that were most active. Those states are Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, both Carolinas, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. However, within these states, there were areas that were even more concentrated when it came to lynchings, counties such as Jefferson County, Alabama, Early and Brooks counties in Georgia, and Anderson County, Texas. These counties were known for having the largest number of lynchings. Now that we've discussed the origins of lynching, let's go on to the purpose. According to the NAACP, lynching is defined as the public killing of an individual who has not received any due process. The crimes that fit the criteria for lynching were often false allegations. However, considering that lynchings were racially motivated and this took place during Reconstruction and the Jim Crow era, you can imagine that these crimes weren't really crimes at all. One of the strangest reasons that perpetuated lynching was the fear of the mixing of races. White men feared that Black men would want to date and marry white women, therefore polluting the population. You can imagine it was a rather flawed way of thinking. Lynchings were often treated as a public spectacle. Entire towns would gather to bear witness to the gruesome act. Women and children would often be present, and parts of the victim's clothing and body would be collected as souvenirs. One instance of this is a young boy named Jesse Washington. He was 18 years old, and he was lynched in Waco, Texas, for the alleged murder of Lucy Ryer. He confessed to the crime to avoid a lynching, but unfortunately that didn't protect him from anything. After his confession, he was met outside the courthouse by a mob who bludgeoned him with various objects all the way to the public square. He was then strung up with a chain that was tossed over a tree limb. A fire was lit beneath him, and he was mutilated by members of the other mob. According to the Waco Horror, an article written by Jesse Washington, someone who shares the same name as the victim, fingers, ears, pieces of clothing, toes, and other parts of the Negro's body were cut off by members of the mob. When Washington had died, all that remained was a charred torso, which was lassoed by a horseman, dragged through the town until the corpse was decapitated. A group of boys then extracted the teeth from the skull and sold them for $5 each. Lynchings were used as fear and an intimidation tactic in order to control Black people. Once the corpse was mutilated and charred beyond repair, someone decided to take it to the courthouse and string it up like it was a flag. This was a site that many people knew too well, and it was something that made people fear for their loved ones, their family members, their friends. In fact, if one was suspected of being the next victim of a lynching, family members would often send the person away in order to save them. These events would soon be known as near lynchings. Now that we've discussed the purpose of lynchings, let's move on to its impact. As I've stated before, the sight of mutilated bodies hanging from trees were all too common between 1877 and 1950. It disturbed and angered Abel Meeropol, a Jewish substitute teacher who decided to take to the keys and the pen and write one of the most iconic songs of all time, Strange Fruit. Originally, it was entitled Bitter Fruit. The lyrics I introduced in the intro depict the sight of the aftermath of a lynching, juxtaposed against the sweet magnolias and pastures of the South. The song made its rounds and eventually landed in the lap of Billie Holiday, a well-known jazz singer at the time. She took it to Cafe Society, New York's first integrated club, and she sang it before an audience of both Black and white people. This would become one of her most iconic songs of all time. In fact, it was so iconic that the FBI tried to stop her from singing the song on multiple occasions. But each time, she persisted. Another impact that lynchings had was the publishing of green books. During the Jim Crow era, green books became more prominent in order to ensure safe travel for African Americans. Titled the Negro Traveler's Green Book, it listed businesses, diners, and motels that were safe to stop at, and it also listed sundown towns. Now, what a sundown town is it's a place where Black people were welcome during the day, but once the sun went down, they had to leave as fast as possible, for if they stayed, they could become the next victim of a lynching. One of the most lasting impacts of lynchings were the monuments that have been erected, honoring the victims and bringing awareness of the horrific act to the public eye. According to the Waco Tribune-Herald, a plaque is set near Waco, Texas. It was published in 2021, and it was A plaque is set to be placed near Waco, Texas, acknowledging the lynching that took place there. Other plaques with similar intentions have been placed in different states and in different counties. Another project that has come about with the impact of lynchings is called the Community Soil Collection Project. Started by the Equal Justice Initiative, this project seeks to collect soil from lynching sites and display the names of the victims. The goal is to spark a dialogue about racial violence and remember the victims that have been lost to it. Today, we have learned about the history of lynching in the US. We have learned about its origins, its purpose, and its lasting impact. Between the years 1877 and 1950, there have been 4,080 documented lynchings, that number being equivalent to the average population of a community college. We cannot look forward without looking back and acknowledging the ground that we have walked on. So with projects like the Community Soil Collection and plaques placed in cities where lynchings took place, we can remember that it was just more than a black and white photo. It was real. Thank you for your time.